To recap our breaking news this hour, NBC News has verified 2 photographs of Officer Darren Wilson. I might have said Darren Williams earlier, but it's Darren Wilson. He is the Ferguson police officer who shot and killed Michael Brown. These are the first photos we have seen of the officer. They were first reported by Yahoo News, and Ferguson police have not responded to NBC News' request for comments on the photos, but NBC News has verified that they are the officer in question. In the wake of a very aggressive response by police to protesters in that shooting, we are seeing a different political reaction in this country, one that's not as predictable and neatly divided as it used to be in situations like this. And that point was driven home when Time published an op-ed by Kentucky Senator Rand Paul on Thursday, expressing grave concern about the conduct of the police in Ferguson. The scenes of camouflaged, heavily armed officers confronting civilians, he wrote, resemble war more than traditional police action. There is, he added, a systemic problem with today's law enforcement. It used to be that the right never questioned law enforcement. That was something supposedly for those criminal coddling liberals. But that may be changing now. Speaking out against the militarization of America's police appears to be part of Senator Paul's broader platform to bring reform to the criminal justice system. He and Democratic Senator Cory Booker are co-sponsoring legislation to end mandatory minimums for nonviolent drug crimes and to restore voting rights for felons.
The problem really of the war on drugs is taking a lot of people who make youthful mistakes. It's punishing them for a lifetime.
Rand Paul has Democratic allies in this mission. The question now is, who on the right will join him? Well, here to discuss this, we have Peter Suderman from Reason Magazine, and Michael Steele is back with us. So, Peter, I'll start with you with Reason, the, I guess, libertarian-leaning magazine. Probably a lot of common ground there with Rand Paul. I wonder, in terms of the broader political right, not just the libertarian movement, but the broader, political right that exists today, how much appetite is there for instance, what Rand Paul is saying this week about the militarization of police?
I think there is a fair amount of appetite, and it's not just Rand Paul. It's also folks like Representative Justin Amash, who issued, if anything, an even more strongly worded statement, just a tweet, but basically said that in addition to seeing Ferguson, saying the images in Ferguson were like a war zone, he also said that the government's militarized response escalated the tension. So he was putting actually some of the blame on the government for escalating tensions there. And I think that that's something that you're increasingly going to see, and you're going to see it for a couple of reasons. One is that conservatives have already started to become convinced that sentencing reform and prison reform in particular is a good idea. And they were kind of hooked on this idea because of budgetary concerns at the state level. So in Texas, for example, Governor Rick Perry has started a prison reform project looking to shut down prisons, actually, because maintaining prisons is very expensive. And so budgetary concerns are kind of the gateway drug here. And then you also see that the crime concerns, the crime wave of the 70s and 80s just doesn't exist anymore. And we see a lot less crime in our cities, a lot less crime on our streets. And that makes it easier for conservatives, for Republicans to take a somewhat more libertarian stance on some of these issues. And you're seeing that with folks like Rand Paul, who's very influential in the party, and with Representative Justin Amash, who's very influential with, I would say, with part of the base, in particular the Tea Party folks.
Well, yeah, Peter, and you mentioned the decline, the really kind of precipitous decline in the violent crime rate in this country over the last generation or so. It just strikes me so much of the success of the Republican Party was built in the 70s, in the 80s, even into the 90s on this tough on crime message, reverence for law enforcement. The Democrats want to understand the criminals. We want to punish the criminals. It's been such a potent message for Republicans. Do you think it works still? Can work still?
I think that Republicans are going to be shifting. I think that Ferguson shows that there is right now that there is a shift going on, and I think that what we're seeing is that Republicans are saying, look, we are a party that has talked about the problems with state power, the problems with unchecked state power, with federal incentives. That's a big part of this. Rand Paul mentions this in his piece for Time magazine. He actually talks about the way the federal government government has spent money, $35 billion from the Department of Homeland Security since 2002 to armor up these local police forces. And so I think that what you're increasingly going to see are conservatives and Republicans who take their natural skepticism of federal power in particular and apply it here and say, look, we need to be consistent. We see that there are problems with this. We see that this is actually making the situation worse. And it's not, we're not even in a situation where you can argue, make the argument that this is necessary because there's a huge crime wave anymore. And so it's just, it's made this new way of seeing things, or I shouldn't say new, but it's new for a lot of Republicans, this different way of seeing things, much more potent than it was 10 years ago.
Yeah, no, and I say in his timepiece, he did try to make that connection that, this is the federal government and devolving down to this. But Michael, I look at this a little skeptically in terms of the politics within the Republican Party, because I certainly take Peter's point about I think there's a growing appetite on the right, and there's a growing appetite in general, I think, for what Rand Paul's talking about here specifically with the police. But I got to think, boy, that old tough on crime message, Republican Party's not going to give that up easily. There's going to be some blowback.
Well, I don't know if they give it up easily or if they give it up completely, but what they do is they update it. And I think that's what Rand Paul is contextualizing right now. I was struck by a comment that he said, if I had been told to get out of the street as a teenager, there would have been a distinct possibility that I might have smarted off, but I wouldn't have expected to be shot. That is revelatory. That is to have someone like a Rand Paul make that kind of acknowledgement. It touches to what we were saying before, to the community that's listening. It opens up a sensitivity in the conversation to the plight of individuals within a specific region of the country or demographic. And that's new. I mean, it's not this wall of we're tough on crime and we're going to enforce the law. It's actually sort of stepping back and looking at how we enforce the law, what tools we use. Do we use tanks or do we walk the street with the protesters? So I think Rand Paul is sort of moving the party. As Peter says, Justin's doing the same thing, Representative Mass doing the same thing, trying to move that conversation in a direction where people are. And I think that that's important. I said to you off air, and I really think it's true, Rand Paul is perhaps the most dangerous man in politics for Democrats and Republicans right now because he's playing against type. He is going outside of his comfort zone, and this is just one of those examples that I think has the potential of transforming the political landscape. Not that you're going to get all the benefits in one election cycle, but if he's consistent and emerges as the leader in that new voice, he can bring the party into a new space that I think is a better space for it.
It was on our airwaves a year ago that Chris Matthews said he thinks, he said, Rand Paul, 2016 Republican nominee, book it. And I said at the time, no, that's crazy. You know what? I don't see that so crazy anymore. Anyway, my thanks to Peter Suderman of Reason Magazine for joining us this morning. Appreciate that. And coming up, vacation shaming of American presidents. We will separate fact from fiction. That's next. Stay with us.